Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We have a special relationship with the United States. It doesn't matter who's in the White House or number 10, and we look forward to working with Donald Trump over the next 4 years.
David Lammy, the UK's Foreign Secretary, speaking today as Donald Trump is sworn in for a second term as US President. Now, Lammy will be tasked with keeping the new Commander-in-Chief happy and nurturing the special relationship. But have the likes of Nigel Farage beaten him to it? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Welcome to the programme. Now, if you're a plane spotter, there've been a few familiar faces stepping off the planes from London to Washington in time for the inauguration today. Liz Truss, Suella Braverman, Priti Patel are among some of the names who are in town. Now, the only official representative of the UK is the Ambassador Karen Pierce, but several figures, particularly from the British political right, are keen to be there to at least soak up the atmosphere, even if they're not officially invited. Keir Starmer won't be there. That's in line with the tradition that foreign leaders don't usually attend US presidential inaugurations. But Reform UK leader Nigel Farage is a confirmed guest of the President-elect, and Caroline, a recent guest of yours.
Yes, absolutely. Only last week I asked Nigel Farage what he was going to do in his few days in Washington. Not that he would give me any details about who's attending his 400-person inauguration party.
It's fairly intimate as inauguration parties go.
Yeah, absolutely. He would only really talk about his economic plan, saying that he absolutely accepts that there would be a big initial cost on day one to the Reform UK plans. But look, the presidential inaugurations are usually domestic affairs. That's the tradition. It's obviously being used as something of a fig leaf for those who've been left out in the cold. Trump has gone out of his way to ensure a smattering of right-wing and far-right leaders have been included. Several other European leaders got the nod. Giorgia Meloni. The EU Commission head Ursula von der Leyen, though, did not. And where, as you might think that the French President Emmanuel Macron might be in Washington, no, it's the far-right politician Éric Zemmour from Reconquest. Is this a statement of intent? That is what everyone is trying to understand about the Trump administration. When you have Elon Musk sharing his new slogan on X, mega Make Europe Great Again.
Expression that's been coined by a few far-right leaders in Europe as well. Let's discuss more now with Bloomberg's UK political editor Alex Wickham. Alex, are we reading too much into this? Are we sort of desperately fumbling around the floor of the invitations that weren't sent or those that have been gleefully received? What does it actually tell us about the state of relations between London and Washington?
Oh, I think it is quite revealing. I mean, you heard David Lammy, there. He's sort of giving it a really good go, saying, come on, we're going to work with Trump. We're going to be friends with them. We're getting on really well with them behind the scenes in all our conversations. Okay, yeah. I mean, I think what is clear from, even stories that we have done on Bloomberg is that Donald Trump has told his associates in Britain privately that he's not a fan of Keir Starmer, funnily enough. He considers him to be very left-wing. He considers him to be not the right leader for Britain and not somebody that's his sort of friend, basically, because his friends are people like Nigel Farage. And that does present a huge problem for Starmer and for the Labour government. America is Britain's closest ally. I think there will always be a link, how do I put it, the sort of, quote, deep state elements of the UK and the US will always be very closely tied together. The royal family, the sort of intelligence services, those sorts of things will always have good relations with the US. But politically...
Those are two separate things, the royal family and the intelligence services.
But politically, it is really, really hard because... let's be honest, Donald Trump knows what Keir Starmer and David Lammy have said about him in the past. Elon Musk has been not reined back at all by Donald Trump in his absolute vitriol against the Labour government. They're interested in Britain, Trump and Musk. They claim that they love Britain, and in a way that's worse for Keir Starmer because of that interest. They think he's the wrong leader and they want Nigel Farage in. So I do think it's a big problem.
Yeah, OK. Farage, meanwhile, only has 5 MPs in Parliament. His party is incredibly novel, and we have to see whether it will last and withstand the test of time. But look, outside of the official attendees, there are all of those Conservative politicians like Suella Braverman, like Priti Patel. I mean, they're there for all the shindigs, all the kind of celebration and the business dealings. I mean, you can think of all the foreign direct investment that US businesses make into the UK, the Fulbright scholars, and all the other links that we have.
Yeah, and let's be honest, there are a lot of these parties, and there are quite a few hangers-on, both on the Trump side who claim to speak for Donald Trump, and on the UK side who sort of claim to speak for the British right. And we should take what they all say with a bucket of salt. But I mean, clearly Farage is front and centre of the sort of British side of the Trump relationship. He has a kind of unique relationship with Trump and his advisors. And, you can just imagine in those private conversations, is Nigel Farage going to be saying to Donald Trump, oh, do us a favour, get us a trade deal, Keir Starmer's someone you could do business with? Of course he isn't. He's a politician, and he is standing against Keir Starmer. He's going to be telling Donald Trump, Keir Starmer's bad news, and you shouldn't do any business with him.
Well, let's listen to a little of what Nigel Farage told you, Caroline and Will Shaw, on this podcast last week when he emphasised his close links to this incoming administration. Take a listen.
It isn't just Trump that I've known for a long time and get on very well, which I do. Half his cabinet I know. Some of them are good friends. This whole movement, they're people I've worked with for a long, long time.
So Nigel Farage there. And of course, today I just saw the photograph, arms outstretched, beaming Nigel Farage at one of the Trump rallies, looking delighted to be there with all the kind of red, white and blue behind him. What is the scope of his influence on the Trump team? And, he does always say that he wants to deliver something for Britain, but as you say, as a politician, what might we expect from that relationship?
I think it's really interesting. Imagine being Peter Mandelson, the new British ambassador to Washington, so long as the Trump team sign it off. You're going to be saying to Trump's team, and probably Nigel Farage, is there anything we can do together to get this relationship fixed? Elon Musk is attacking the government every day. Donald Trump is sending posts on Truth Social about British wind farms, which are in themselves pretty extraordinary. What could Nigel Farage do to help the UK? And the risk for Nigel Farage, I think, is that he starts to look like he's actually undermining Britain. And some of the British right do need to be a little bit careful about this, because if people start feeling worse off because of Trump tariffs or around the world or even here, and suddenly a series of Donald Trump sort of maverick / crazy decisions start to be looked at very badly by British voters, Nigel Farage might want to think twice about being too closely linked to some of that stuff. As we've seen with Elon Musk, you can get burned by hanging out too closely with some of these people. But it is there is a potential there for big danger for Keir Starmer, because ultimately, if things start to go wrong, people are going to blame the British government. That is what everybody always does. It's the government's fault whenever anything goes wrong. That's the hard fact about being in government. And Nigel Farage has this sort of vision now where he wants to replace the Tories as the main opposition in Britain. Even if he doesn't have the seats in Parliament, he sort of is there in the polls. And he will really, really try and grab onto Donald Trump and try and do this sort of global right-wing movement. Whether the British voters are up for it, will remain to be seen. But anything can happen in politics, as we've seen over the last 5 years.
Well, I mean, aside from that sort of grandstanding that we're going to see in Washington over the next couple of days with all of these events, I mean, how worried are people in Labour and in the government about the Trump administration and the sort of effect that it could have on Britain? Definitely
worried. And you sort of, I feel there's this kind of strange disconnect between some of the spin that's coming out of Number 10. Even Lammy sort of going, oh, we're all going to be friends.
It's diplomacy, isn't it?
Yeah. But even the sort of idea that the Labour government is entertaining that, perhaps we could have a trade deal with the US. Okay, well, Boris Johnson tried to have a trade deal with Donald Trump, and they were relatively close, certainly closer politically and closer personally, and those negotiations went absolutely nowhere because the American and British sides were so far apart, and the American demands were seen as impossible for Britain to accept. So if Boris Johnson and Donald Trump couldn't do a trade deal, does Keir Starmer really think he's going to be able to get better terms? I think there's a kind of fantasy world being lived in a little bit by some people in Number 10. Others in government are more realistic, and they realise there are major threats, and it's the instability that's the problem globally, because as we've seen in markets in recent weeks, it's those sorts of global moves that can have a very acute effect in Britain, and anything Donald Trump does that's unpredictable, that affects the whole global economy, will be felt here. Yeah,
although you could also argue that there's equally a fantasy on the Reform UK Farage side, saying that there are sectoral trade deals to be done, and with the right government those can be done. Let's not talk about agriculture, but which is what Farage told us on Bloomberg, but there would be sectoral deals to be done with financial services. Again, that was not possible under serious negotiations under the last Conservative government, or one before last. In terms of the order of business, though, when it comes to the UK, we haven't actually got to the other massive issue, which is Ukraine and Britain's strong support of Ukraine, and where Britain would be left if Trump does try to alter that landscape.
Absolutely. And Ukraine is, if you're the Prime Minister of Britain, it is the thing that you probably have most of your meetings on, or most of your important meetings on throughout the week, is Ukraine. And certainly at the moment, how do you get through the next few months of Trump, and whichever way he is going to go, they are trying very, very hard to get Trump to not force Ukraine into negotiations prematurely, where Russia currently has the advantage on the battlefield, because that would mean Putin is negotiating from a position of strength and Ukraine is negotiating from a position of weakness. But, there are conversations taking place daily between British officials, other European officials, and the Trump team, trying to make this case to them. They think they're getting somewhere. They think that they can convince Donald Trump, you don't want to have a sort of humiliation where Russia wins. You don't want to tell China that aggression can be rewarded in this way. You don't want to do what Joe Biden did running out of Afghanistan, that sort of thing. They think there's something there with Trump in terms of making those arguments, but the reality is they don't know which way it's going to go.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And that's before we even get on to a complete, if there's a real change in climate change policy, DE&I policy, how would that affect the UK?
Agenda.
Yeah.
And perhaps there's an opening for the UK to take leadership in those positions as well. Those are issues that we'll have to come back to another day. But for now, Alex Wickham, our UK political editor, thank you very much for joining us. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give us 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo. Our audio engineer was Sean Grastamakia. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. We'll be back with more tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.